Hi everyone, I'm Josh and welcome to Josh Wright Piano TV. Thank you so much for joining me today. I wanted to talk about overcoming performance anxiety or dealing with nerves, one of the most common and most requested topics on my channel. I've posted many of my favorite strategies on many different videos on this channel, but I wanted to put a slightly different spin on a solution that might work for each of you if you have nerves around performing for others or just performing a piece straight through or whatever it might be. The piano is, performing on the piano is a very difficult task that requires so much brain power, so much creativity, and performing is a separate skill. That's actually a video that we've gone over on this channel, how performing is a separate skill from just playing the piano well. I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about exposure therapy. So if someone has a crippling fear of snakes, they will gradually introduce snakes to that person until they can deal with it. It doesn't mean the person's going to love snakes, but it will gradually help them to cope with perhaps an irrational fear. And I see with a lot of students irrational fears regarding performing. I hopped onto Google and just so I could give a better definition that I could come up with for exposure therapy. This is from the American Psychological Association website. And I'm just going to read the first paragraph. It says, exposure therapy is a psychological treatment that was developed to help people confront their fears. When people are fearful of something, they tend to avoid the feared objects, activities, or situations. Although this avoidance might help reduce feelings of fear in the short term, over the long term, it can make the fear become even worse. We're going to talk about that. In such situations, a psychologist might recommend a program of exposure therapy in order to help break the pattern of avoidance and fear. In this form of therapy, psychologists create a safe environment in which to expose the individuals to the things they fear and avoid. The exposure to the feared objects, activities, or situations in a safe environment helps reduce fear and decrease avoidance. I've seen this many different times in many of my students, and I've even seen it in my own life. I remember after I finished my doctorate degree at the University of Michigan, I was still performing from time to time, but I noticed that I was so focused on pro practice and these online courses that I wasn't really happy with myself and where I was at with performing. So I gradually started booking more performances and just challenging myself, even if I created the performance myself and I just was inviting family and friends, or I was saying yes to a lot more engagements than I usually would. And I was gradually getting my muscle, that performing muscle, back into shape. A lot of students will have a disaster in a recital. They'll have a big memory slip. Some even have to walk off the stage without completing their piece. And that builds up in their mind. I recently had a student win a local competition. It was his first competition, and he did really well at it. And then he went to the winner's recital, and he said it was a disaster. And he texted me that after I had a family commitment. I couldn't attend his winner's recital performance. And I said, I want you to perform that for a family member or friend tomorrow. I don't want you stewing over that performance because each performance in the grand scheme of things is insignificant, but we can make it significant. I remember I did not play very well at the finals of the National Chopin competition. I was very nervous. One judge even said, "Oh, we wanted to give you first prize, and your last round was so bad that we were going to give you sixth." There was 6 finalists, but your mazurkas were so good that we gave you fifth. And I was like, okay. And so I could have let that perform, and I kind of did in many ways. I kind of let that performance like decrease my confidence. And I was like, gosh, I'm just not a clean performer. I just didn't play well. And then I started having more successful performances once I started booking more gigs again and getting out there and performing more often. And my confidence came back. And I realized, oh, one performance shouldn't define who I am. So students will often have those horrible setbacks, and they'll say, performing just isn't for me. And it's not, like that definition said, it's a relief in the short term. They're like, oh, good, I don't ever have to perform for people. But then new problems creep in. The student will start avoiding playing for me in a lesson, they'll say, can I just make a recording for you and just send it to you? And you just play that so I can show you my best performance. And occasionally that's fine. I don't mind doing that occasionally. But most of the time I want to hear them play it live, because if they can play it in front of me, I'm probably the scariest person they'll play for. My teachers are the scariest people I play for. Not that I'm fearful of my teachers, but they're the people whose opinions I care about the most. And so if you can play well in front of your teacher, you can usually play pretty well in front of a big crowd. So I make them perform as often as possible. And one of the best, safest ways that you can start performing is just to press that button of record, whether it's on your phone or you get a Blue Yeti microphone, which I've talked about on this channel. If you don't know what that microphone is, just type in Josh Wright Blue Yeti, Y-E-T-I, and a video will come up showing you the settings I like on that microphone. Easy USB mic, or if you have a really professional setup like the setup that I have for these videos, no matter what your setup is, press that record button and play through. If you're like me, you'll say, I'll just record in a few days once it's a little better. I don't want to listen to this ugly playing. I know it's not good yet. And you'll keep avoiding it. And then pretty soon the performance is there and you haven't recorded at all. So that's number one. That's the safest environment. You're by yourself, but the little red button is staring at you in the face. And a lot of people are more fearful of the red button of recording than playing for an audience. So regardless of what kind of personality you have, go ahead and start recording for yourself, and then invite a family member or someone who is most close to you. So for me, that is my daughter or my wife. Okay, so my son's too little to sit and listen. So one day he'll be one of my audience members, my first audience members. And most of my performances for my wife and daughter are the first performances I give, and they're usually a disaster. Usually I have to, I will make a bunch of mistakes, or I'll have to pull out the music. This is like the first time I perform. Sometimes it's the day that I memorized that that piece, and it's my first performance. So you think, gosh, why are you performing that quickly? Well, I want to get that ball rolling quickly. And then once I do that, I'll spend a few more days practicing, tweaking any mistakes that I made, and then I will have them come back in and perform for them again. And usually it goes much better that second time. The first time, you just got to get it out of the way. It's usually always bad. I'm not going to name names because this was just a story told to me by a friend, but he said he was performing for a school event many, many years ago with a pianist who's very, very famous today. And he said it wasn't good. He played and there was like messy passages and there was mistakes, and it wasn't the pianist that we all know and love, because he said that was his first performance of that piece, but he was getting ready for some concerts. So even the best pianists around have a process that they have to work through in order to get something performance ready. After you do that, expose yourself to a little bit more. Maybe you invite some neighbors over, or you invite more extended family over, and pretty soon you are priming that muscle and you're strengthening it and you're priming the pump to be able to perform bigger concerts. Then you might book a local recital hall and invite 30 friends. And then that's plenty for 99% of people, especially if piano is not your career. That's a great milestone to invite family, friends, neighbors, whoever it might be, in a formal setting, in a small little concert hall. I mean, at a music store even is fine. That seats 30 to 50 people. That's totally fine. Or a local university with a small concert hall. That's a good milestone that really makes everyone feel accomplished, and it's great. Now, if you have even bigger engagements coming up, I want you to try all of these things. All that exposure therapy will help. I remember it was about 4 weeks before a recent concert that I gave in southern Utah, and the Mendelssohn Serious Variations, which we recently did tutorials on. There was a couple variations in there that just were not feeling very good. And I just kept performing. And one day it just kind of clicked and they felt fine. The Beethoven Waldstein Sonata, even though it wasn't my best performance down in southern Utah, still went okay. And it was my first public performance ever. I'd done maybe 10 small little concerts, but I wasn't nervous for that performance, or not heavily nervous. I had a little bit of anticipation, feeling anxious anticipation, but it wasn't like crippling nerves because I had done that. Now, if I hadn't done all of that preparation beforehand, I would have been so nervous to the point of being crippled by those nerves. So there are occasional instances where you're called to fill in for someone and you're not going to have time to play through a recital many times for family members and friends. Sometimes you just have to buck up and do it and be courageous and brave. But for the most part, that is not the case. And if you're working that muscle continuously with different programs, you will be ready if a situation like that arises, which isn't all that often. You're not being called all the time, unless you're one of the top pianists in the world, to fill in for sick artists. Usually you have plenty of time to prepare that concert. So this idea of exposure therapy, giving yourself small exposures to this. If I have a student who's really bad at sight reading, I make them sight read every single day. If I have a student who's really bad at memorize, I make them memorize every single piece they are working on, or close to every single piece. We're just exercising that muscle. So for most people, I'd say probably 90% plus, we all deal with some form of performance anxiety. So think about this idea of exposure therapy and how you can use small exposures to slightly more anxiety-inducing events, exposing yourself to that. Nothing was ever as nerve-wracking as the International Chopin Competition preliminaries. I didn't even make it past the preliminaries, but that was broadcast to the world. You can still go and watch that. I was so nervous for that. Not that there was a big crowd there. It was very few people there. It was just the panel of judges and then, maybe 30 or 50 people in the audience just watching the preliminaries. But I knew that was being broadcast to the world. But even worse, I knew it would be immortalized. I knew that, hey, people will be able to see all my mistakes for many years to come. You have to learn to lay that aside. You have to learn that who cares what other people think about my performance? The opinion that matters the most to me is my own. And then it's my wife and my 3 teachers. And that's it. We're actually going to be doing another video here on the channel in the next few weeks about that concept. But choose carefully who you listen to and whose opinion you care about. And abandon all other opinions, because generally it doesn't serve you well. Either it's going to inflate your ego by someone who doesn't really know what they're doing if you play a bad performance and they're like, that's great. Or it's someone who's overly critical and you actually did okay, but they're going to sit and pick apart every single mistake. You know where you stand. And if you don't, you need a good quality teacher. Find a good teacher that can help you with that. Someone who's nurturing and caring. They can be hard on you. I'm not saying they have to be a pushover, but I'm saying find someone who you can trust to help you. But don't be taking every single person's opinion. Know where you stand. Do the exposure therapy. Give yourself 5 or 10 or 15 performances before the big performance, and I think it will go a lot better. I hope today's video has been helpful. If you don't mind subscribing and liking this video, that would mean a great deal to me. Helps to spread this information to more people. If you have any questions, my email is josh@joshwrightpiano.com. I'll leave a few links for a free webinar containing 10 of my favorite tips to help take your playing to a higher level in the description below, along with links for my paid courses if you'd like to go even deeper than this channel goes over. And finally, a link for my gear kit, all the gear I use in this studio to film these videos in case you're wanting to make recordings of your own. Have a great week. Good luck in your practice sessions.